Namaste, Dave.
Namaste, Bhagavan.
Okay, why don't we start with the amazing story of how we both got this idea at the same time?
Are you talking about from reading the article?
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you sent me the article and I started to read it, it definitely put into perspective a lot of the experiences that I had before I got the knowledge on what exactly was happening. And me and you spoke about my experience with telepathy or research into telepathy, and then how that kind of
You had an experience with your brother, right?
yeah.
Tell us about it.
Just for like some chronological order, I had taken a lot of psychedelics before this event happened. I don't think that that necessarily set up the conditions for this because, as you explained before, some of these synchronicities can't be controlled, but there is an underlining connection or a channel that it's working through, which is love. So this is my younger brother. Obviously, I love him dearly, and I was on the bus one day and I daydream often. I was having a daydream that my brother was very angry, um, and he was frustrated and he wanted to punch something. And he was right across from me looking at me and he wanted to punch me. So I allowed him to punch me in the daydream. And then I woke up from it uh, to a call. And the call was from my mom. And my mom had told me that my brother was headed to the hospital because he fractured his pinky. He was frustrated about some things that had went on in the day that he was dealing with and punched the wall. So you don't have to get into much analysis to see that there's something weird going on, that I shouldn't have been able to have that information.
That falls under paranormal experience for sure.
Yeah.
And you notice I'm kind of staying away from the spiritual context. But of course, anybody who does spiritual practices has all kinds of inner experiences that are inexplicable by any kind of scientific reductionism or materialism. Um, and not only that, these happen in life to ordinary people with no spiritual background. So how do we explain this? What is the mechanism? There obviously has to be some natural law that is higher than the material laws of physics and stuff that we understand from the default paradigm.
Yes.
How about that girl in Mexico who could read her mother's mind?
Was this from the telepathy tapes?
Yeah, yeah. No, that's another synchronicity, isn't it?
Yeah,
That you
that
and I
is
got the link to this thing both at the same time, independently.
independently.
And you told me you were going to email me or message me about it. And then I messaged you.
Exactly. And both our consciousnesses have been so focused on this topic since we got the article that I think that also is anecdotal evidence, if you would say, to the underlining structure that's happening, which is that it has to do with consciousness. I mean, obsessively contemplating on an idea could be a form of intense
Oh, yeah,
state of consciousness, so maybe that has something to do with it also.
absolutely, because that is the mechanism used in sadhana. In sadhana, especially in meditation, for example, japa, one takes an idea expressed by a mantra and then makes many, many, many impressions of it. And the idea, of course, is to build up a huge stock of mental impressions on this particular idea. So that may be a formalized or um, regulated form of this kind of phenomenon, but it also happens in people's lives spontaneously due to their being obsessed about something. Now, as I recalled, I was feeling kind of uneasy going into the end of the year, that I feel like I'm missing something, that I haven't got something quite right. And so I was meditating on that like anything, you know? And then all this stuff happened, which I see as a clear message. It's a message from God, you know, to quote the cliche, but it really is, because the universe is intelligent. The living force is intelligent, and the living force is everywhere. Consciousness is everywhere. That was my experience back in 1984. Consciousness is within everything. The same consciousness, Brahman, the self. The self in all living creatures is identical, not just similar, but the same. There's only one. And it expresses itself in myriad forms by the potency of nature, Maya, which
Maya.
creates the appearance of duality and multiplicity, even though actually it doesn't exist. It's quite a trick, isn't it?
Can I speak on this? Because
See?
the PTG really got me intrigued, and maybe we can go into, let's say, a borderline between spirituality and just basic human societal structures. Um, in taking a look at the shamanistic hunter-gatherer cultures, they had a form of PTG in their initiation rituals of the young men into the warrior class, um, usually involving some very obscure and rather painful processes in order to condition the boy into a new age of being, as an adult, as one of the tribe members. Some of these have really esoteric and philosophical symbology to them, like leaving a kid alone for a day in the forest to replicate some type of separation from the tribe, which thus is like recreating death, and the kid has to deal with this. And after a day of being left out, in the woods, he's met with the elders, and the elders now initiate him into this overcoming of like death, you know. And then that's when they inject the the lore or the mythos of that tribe into the kid, because they're using the traumatic event in order to attach symbols onto it. And usually they introduce the young child to the deity that they worship, and this deity is like a part and parcel. So I was looking at it, I'm like, whoa, is spiritual initiations and rituals the first post-traumatic growth systems that came out of early humans to be able to sustain themselves in communities, and live in such harsh predicaments?
I think they observed post traumatic growth spontaneously.
Yes.
Incidents where, because they lived in a dangerous environment, maybe somebody got injured, but they held that traumatic experience in such a way that, in such a context, that it turned into a means of growth. And then they said, well, what if we create these kind of situations artificially, deliberately? And this is how initiations came to be. I went through the manhood initiation of the Navajo tribe in southern New Mexico, which included the sun dance, which is a
Yeah.
deliberately inflicted trauma. You know the sun dance?
Yeah, I was reading up. This is the hooking. Is it the hooking on to
Yeah,
the muscles and hanging
from the tree. Yeah, from the
from the
pole.
tree?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and worshiping the sun and the eagle. The eagle whistle, huh? That you hold in your mouth while you're doing this dance around the pole. It's intense. And before and after that, there are like elaborate ceremonies. And I was initiated, I was given an identity in the tribe that I was a fire person of the southwest direction. The directions are very important in that system. But
Is this a universal identity rather than a local identity?
yeah, it's local in the tribe. But then if you go to any other branch of that tribe, like the Leconta, the Sioux, and you tell them, oh, I'm so and so in the Navajo tribe, they understand it and then they deal with you appropriately.
Oh, but I meant like, is it a God name? Is that name connected to a context that's universal?
No, no, no. It's connected with how you are or how you behave in the initiation ceremony. In other words, they push you to your limits and then beyond your limits and see how you deal with it. And the way that you deal with it becomes your name. Remember that, remember that
That's
movie, Dances with Wolves?
Dances with Wolves. I think I've seen it once.
Well, this guy, this white guy, hero, military hero, is out in the frontier, and he's exploring. And part of his exploration is he makes friends with some wolves, and he's like running and playing and dancing with the wolves, and they're like tripping him and making him roll on the ground, and then they jump over him. It's really beautiful, right? But the Indians see this, and he gives him the name Dances with Wolves because that's what he did, right? And so in my case, I was, the fire warden.
Fire Warden?
Warden, yeah, the guy who holds the fire from one ceremony to the next. That was my name, fire warden. I forget the language. It was this is when I was 20 years old. So
Yeah, yeah, a very long time ago.
yeah, yeah, a couple of centuries ago, I think.
This is the perfect example of the PTG, like you said, spontaneous PTG.
Well, it's actually pretty contrived. It's pretty ritualistic. But I can imagine that they got the idea by seeing spontaneous or natural or accidental traumas and seeing how people dealt with them. That, if you don't deal with the trauma constructively, it can destroy you or anyway, minimize your energy and so on. But if you deal with it creatively and constructively, it can boost you into another level. That's that's the whole thing, not behind initiations, I think. They wanted everybody in the tribe to have gone through this fire of initiation, this test,
Mhm.
and to see how they deal with it. It's not something you do consciously. You can't. Your will is superseded by the intensity of the trauma, by the intensity of the initiation. That's the whole point. That's why often psychedelic drugs are involved.
Yeah, I was going to mention that.
Yeah, because they overwhelm your mind and intelligence. And you have to fall back on your essence to deal with it. You can't deal with it superficially. Mind is not functioning in that space.
Yeah.
Mind is overwhelmed.
You can't call out for a line of help, in Who Wants to Be a Millionaire in that situation. Can't call out. It's you and yourself, man.
And you got to deal with it.
And you have to sit there. Yeah.
Part of the initiation was a 3-day vision quest where they not only took me out in the wilderness and left me alone, I was tied up.
Yeah. To a tree?
Yeah.
Yeah.
and given some peyote.
Yep.
So yeah, it's definitely calculated to push you to the limits and beyond your limits and see how you deal with it. And that is your essence, your real nature. It can't be faked.
Ah, ah.
Yeah, that's the whole idea. Who are you really?
Who are you?
Yeah.
Yeah. We gotta stress test this to get the real thing to come out. When you're faced with death and pain and the ego is pushed to almost being dissolved, what is your being in that state? What do you gravitate to naturally? And then they name you appropriately. That's very high tech as far as psychology goes.
Oh, yeah. It's very sophisticated. I mean, by comparison, our feeble attempts at sadhana
Yeah, yeah, right.
seem to be really lukewarm, you know?
Most definitely.
Although they try to follow the same principle, but they try to do it in a manageable way, staying within the limits of the society, you know, below the energy level of freak out. But these authentic initiations deliberately push you beyond freak out.
Could we give credit though to sadhana practices? Because I do think that maybe there's a subtle sacrifice that needs to be made in sadhana. Like it's just not the asana position. It's more than that. It's a relinquishing. It's the Buddha didn't just go to the tree to sit down,
Right.
giving up everything that the world is calling to you, and then having to stay, in a seated position for a long amount of time. Maybe like what you said, when you got your first path of realization that you were meditating for 12 days. That's not easy.
No,
That's
no,
not easy.
12 hours a day.
I mean, yeah, 12 hours a day. Yeah.
More than 12 hours. Yeah, you have to have a good seat.
But I wouldn't consider that lukewarm, is what I'm saying. Like, I would say that is pretty intense.
It was funny because I was just following my intuition. And my intuition was saying, you know, go within, go deep within, and just see what's there. I didn't have a plan. This wasn't a strategy that I was executing by my will. I was following an inner impulse that said, you know, just sit and see what happens. And whoa, Shakti herself came, gave me Shakti pot, opened up the Rudra Granthi, huh, that separates the mind from the Sahasrara chakra, and showed me how consciousness is everything. Like Prabhupada said, don't try to see God, but act in such a way that God wants to see you. So when we purify ourselves by, I mean, there's so many spiritual practices, right? But they all work. According to the Vedanta Sutra, Brahma Sutra, all the meditations given in the scriptures work because we are superimposing the object of meditation on Brahman. And we're using it as a symbol to focus the mind. So, in whatever way we worship Brahman, that is what we become by that sadhana. So, basically, all forms of sadhana work, but the result may be different according to the intensity. I think the intensity matters a lot, much more than perhaps we give it credit for.
No, I think it does entirely. I mean, that's what you're going to be getting into with this series is transformative experiences, things that push beyond the norm, the mundane, into something that even gives purpose, meaning. You know, that's why I think the Vedic system kind of like got it perfectly with how they, And this is just a term to be used, socially engineered a society to have certain impressions and go under certain amounts of intentional suffering in order to push the boundaries of what is known to be the body and get into those higher states where everything is one. But they have a context for it, which is interesting. And
Forest.
they, yeah, they have brought up in the article that we were reading about these traumatic impressions are used almost like alchemy to represent a truth of nature, which could be like death, the sacrificing of an animal, but also the sacrificing of God in the form of this animal to feed, to sustain. So using the traumatic experience, giving it proper context, and then the individual then has like a better relationship or a true relationship.
To the extent that they implement the whole process,
Yeah.
or should I say, to the degree of the energy they invest in it. Like, to just sit there and chant a mantra X number of times a day as a regulated function is not too much different from any kind of mundane work like going to the office, or any kind of routine work. The energy level is low. And later on, I'm going to do a video, discussing the energy level chart in detail. The problem is with ordinary regulated sadhana, you never get to the higher energy levels where all the interesting stuff happens. You have to go beyond, like meditating 12 hours a day for 3 or 6 weeks or whatever it was, or like doing the sun dance, doing fire ceremonies back to back for 3 days in a row. Man, it's hot in there. Going out in the wilderness and being alone and whatever. You have to be pushed beyond your limits, because your limits are what closes you off from these higher functions, from these higher laws. They're there. They're operating all the time. But we don't notice them, or we don't feel them, or we don't exercise them, because we're not put in a position of such necessity that we have to. So being naturally lazy and attracted to, easy life and stuff like that, we just relax and follow the program and miss it, because we never reach that intense level where transformation can happen. And yeah, it is stated in the scriptures that regulated sadhana does give results, but it's very, very slow. What we have to do to get fast results is to turn it up to 12. Like yogis are described as sitting among 5 fires at noon in the summer in India. If you can imagine how hot that would be,
Yeah.
probably 150 degrees Fahrenheit, up in that range. On the other hand, immersing their whole body in freezing cold mountain lake, or going out naked in the snow.
I was about to say, the yogis that go out naked in the mountains and sit there, and it's like how are they even maintaining their temperature is unfathomable.
Well, there's this Tibetan thing called tummo, a certain type of breathing practice, And of course, they use different herbs and stuff. But, just putting yourself out there on the line is in itself something very special. Being out in nature, living in a cave or living in the mountains, the forest, on the bank of a river, underneath a tree. I've done all these things. I don't know anybody else actually who's done it. Well, the people I met when I was out there,
That we're doing it.
yeah, they're
Yeah.
good. That's why I was floating the idea of going to the Mahakumbha Mela.
400 million.
Oh my God, who could even imagine?
I know. It's crazy.
But every 12 years, the real sadhus, the guys that are like 300 years old and live in a cave in the Himalayas, actually come out in public. Prabhupada took his disciples one time to Kumbh Mela, and he was pointing these guys out. He said, "You see this guy? How old is he?" And the disciples would say, "Oh, maybe 16 or 18." And Prabhupada laughed and said, "No, he's like 300 years old." So, yeah, there's more in this world than we know, or more than we can know. I mean, just sit out in nature and look at everything, the birds and the trees, stars, sun, moon, all of that is like beyond our comprehension. So-called science only knows a tiny fraction of it. There's so much more that we will never know. And so, to put yourself in that consciousness is very humbling. And you develop an appreciation for people who have gone beyond and what they had to go through to get there.
It's almost inherently going to have to deal with some type of tribulation, some type of trial, some type of
Suffering,
suffering. Yeah.
tapasya. Tapasya means intentional suffering.
I feel like right now, I'm saying Western, but this is becoming more of just like a modern age thing, that people are suffering more and more. They actually have to move in their day to survive more than they can be creative in life due to economy and all these different issues. And that Western thought gives an ideology, the American dream, but not really a purpose for the suffering, an ultimate purpose for hardship. It gives you a cheap deal, you know, cheap deal. Here's a dream. You're gonna work hard, but really in reality, you're gonna be working for your survival. I feel like this is why a lot of people are suffering even more, because the suffering doesn't have a purpose versus the older cultures, civilizations, and even Eastern thought right now. But again, Western ideology is kind of corrupting most of the planet.
Well, because materialism allows you to take it easy. And taking it easy means you never reach the energy levels necessary for real growth, real transformation. So nature pushes us through calamities of different kinds to force us to reach that level of intensity because she needs that consciousness to achieve her purpose of acting as a mirror for Shiva, to show him his nature so that he can realize his self, which is why he creates all this, or why he creates her, and she creates all this. So that's another point that we can go in deeply at another time. I think we're out of time. Thank you
Yes.
so much. I really
Yes.
enjoyed it, and I hope we have many more.
Yes. May the journey continue.
Namaste.
Namaste.